want to go through the Smith reading a little bit earlier in this video before maybe everybody has posted their summaries, because Smith has a few points early on where a number of folks it's easy to misunderstand. In fact, I think most people reading it would misunderstand it, so I'm going to post this video a little bit earlier just to set out a few important points. If you understand these, the rest of Smith will make sense. So let me go through the Smith a little bit early and get folks going off on the right foot. So with Smith, he is, as I've mentioned in the previous video, known as the father of economics. Now, the piece we're reading is from chapter 4 of The Wealth of Nations, which is a book that really revolutionized not just economics, but politics and other areas. It is, without a doubt, one of the most important books ever published in the world because of its influence on economics and how both individuals, large companies and groups, and nations generate wealth. And it's remained a foundational text ever since it was published. Interesting to know is that Adam Smith was not an economist. In 1776, when he published this, no such position really existed. There weren't economics departments at universities or other things. Nobody understood this idea that there might be a field of study called economics. So with this, he gave birth to this field of study. What he was instead was a philosopher, and he was a moral philosopher writing on ethics and morals and other things within philosophy. And his writings in these fields are, quite rigorous and quite good. They did not, however, stand out the way this did. This really revolutionized the way governments approached economics and the way individuals understood it. Okay, so definitely this is by far his most influential work and one of the most influential works in the history of the world. If you look at charts and you could punch in GDP, gross domestic product, historical, and look at historical charts, what you will see is that essentially with the publication of this book, world GDP started to increase dramatically. Those are estimates, very rough estimates, but it's very clear once people understood how markets work, and that's what Smith basically spells out. Once they understood that, the wealth of the world started to gradually and definitely forcefully increase in the decades and the centuries since. Okay? And that's held true since then. So he is considered to be the father of economics, and this selection from the book is considered to be one of the most important parts. And one of the things he starts off with, and this is in the first paragraph that you have, is the idea and how people think of wealth. And what he's going to do in these opening sections is take on common misconceptions. Now, you might think that, well, in the 230 or 240 years since this has been published, we would have a better understanding. We wouldn't make the common errors that they made back in 1776. Well, in fact, we still do. Most people misunderstand economics as just the study of money, and think wealth is simply the accumulation of money. Those two statements are, in fact, false. We've known this since the publication of The Wealth of Nations. Smith has shown these to be untrue. And now if you'll go to paragraph 1 on page 5, I want to show you something about these opening paragraphs. What he's doing is setting up common notions, and then what he's going to do in the pages later on in the piece, he's going to dismantle them. So, and you have to watch him very carefully, he engages in a type of rhetoric called understatement. So paragraph 1, page 5, that wealth consists in money, ore and silver is a popular notion which naturally arises from the double function of money, as an instrument of commerce and as a measure of value. This is very important because what he's setting out at the start there is an error. That wealth consists in money is a mistake. It's an error, and it's very important to keep that in mind, because it doesn't consist just in money. The second half of that is in fact true. Money does two things, okay? A double function of money as an instrument of commerce. In other words, you use it for trade. That's what you use it for. There's no other significant use for money. People might find little uses for it, but no other significant use for money That's quite common. Instead, we use it when we go to the store. We use some type of money to make a transaction, and the store accepts money for that transaction. And when businesses trade with each other, they use some type of money to make those transactions complete. So that's what we use it for. The other use is as a measure of value. Okay? So first thing it does is it makes trade easier. The next thing it does is it makes it easier to assess the value of something. You could say that a car is worth 20 cows. You could say that, and that's a measure of value. It's not a universal measure of value, though, because cows might be valued differently to somebody in one part of the country and then somebody in the other where cows are not very common. If you're in an area where cows are common, you might understand their worth. But in other areas, they might not understand it. So you can measure things with cows. You can measure value with just about anything. What money does is it becomes a common language for saying that is worth, and then you put a money value in there. Not a value in cows, not a value in cars, not a value in work hours or anything else or any other type of unit. You instead say that car is worth $5,000. You don't say that car is worth 20 cows. So it's a measure of value, but it's also an instrument of commerce. You could go to the car dealership and try to trade them 20 cows, but instead they probably want cash or money or something that will provide them with cash, because they can turn that around and buy more cars, pay their employees, pay their bills. Money is an easy tool for those two purposes. That's what Smith points out. It does not represent wealth in and of itself. That's not wealth. So that's a common misconception. So in consequence of it being, I'm just continuing here, in consequence of its being an instrument of commerce, when we have money, we can more readily obtain whatever else we have occasion for than by means of any other commodity. In other words, it works better. It's the best tool for commerce, but it's not inherently wealth. It's not the end of what wealth is. If you jump over to the next paragraph, he starts off and he takes this analogy further, because this analogy demonstrates another error. A rich country, in the same manner as a rich man, is supposed to be a country abounding in money, and to heap up gold and silver in any country is supposed to be the readiest way to enrich it. These are again errors. Going after money, in this case, an international unit of money would not be the country's unit of money, but instead gold and silver. If you're from England and you want to do trade with Italy, you don't bring British pounds, you instead bring gold and silver. That's just an international monetary unit. This is an error, and what Smith goes on in this paragraph is to point out that the Spaniards, and they did, pursue this economic policy of trying to get as much gold and silver in the country to make it rich. In the end, it failed. At this time period, England is becoming the world's most powerful country. Spain had been a competitor with England. Spain followed the economic policy of going after gold and silver, and England followed a different policy and didn't just do that, but worked on productivity. Productivity, in the end, is what makes a country and also an individual wealthy. That's going to be one of Smith's main points. It's not just about the money, it's about the productivity. What can you produce that you can trade for other goods and services? Productivity is what you're looking for wealth. The real idea is that you want to increase a country's productivity, and going to college, what you're doing is increasing your ability to be productive. Your skills at the end of college will be more valuable, and you'll be able to trade them, and that will in the end make you a wealthier individual. Just holding on to money from a minimum wage job isn't going to make you wealthy in the end. Instead, you're increasing your value by becoming more productive, by getting a more valuable degree that you can trade out there for money. Your skills you'll be able to trade later on. So the measure of wealth is really a measure of productivity, not simply money. Okay? If you jump to paragraph 3, this is on page 6. Mr. Locke remarks a distinction between money and all movable goods, all their movable goods. All other movable goods, he says, are of so consumable a nature that the wealth which consists in them cannot much be depended on. In a nation which abounds in them one year may without exportation, but merely their own waste and extravagance, be in great want of them the next. Money, on the contrary, is a steady friend, which though it may travel from hand to hand, yet if it be kept from going out of the country is not very liable to be wasted and consumed. Gold and silver, therefore, are, according to him, the most solid and substantial part of the movable wealth of a nation, and to multiply those metals ought, he thinks, upon that account to be the great object of its political economy. This is wrong. Okay, I want to be very clear about this. It's commonly misunderstood. What Smith is going to do is spend the next few pages dismantling this idea and showing how erroneous it is. This is an error that people make just as commonly today as they did in Smith's time. This idea that the end game of the nation should be to get as much money as it possibly can. That is incorrect. Now, something that personifies economics is that it is both a field that relies on ideology, but it also relies on empirical measures. It is going to share something in common both with political science, but also with the hard sciences, or with scientific method in general. And that in the end, economic theories can be tested. This is very important to keep in mind. Locke is promoting, or was promoting, a theory of economics, a macro theory, a theory of how nations become wealthy, which is this idea that they should hold on to their money and hold on to their gold and silver. That is, again, as Smith pointed out, the policy that Spain pursued from around 1492, when it sent off Columbus, until around this time. So Locke, in the value of money, is in error. Because what Smith is going to show, if you really want to be wealthy as a nation, what you're going to want to focus on is productivity. Okay? Focus on productivity. What has happened since Smith and Locke's time is that both theories have essentially been tested. Both theories have essentially been tested. The obvious examples are to test the value of the British economy during the 17 and 1800s and what happened with the Spanish economy during the 17 and 1800s. As most Californians know, the Spaniards had to retreat from California in the 1700s. The British were expanding their empire because they were following a different economic policy, one based more on Smith's approach, which is to improve productivity rather than to hoard money and to hoard gold and silver. Okay? So Locke's theory, and again, Locke had a theory and Smith had a theory. These were competing theories of economics. In Smith's time, this was a debate. This was a lively debate because the knowledge of economics and the experience of economic testing wasn't yet developed. In the time since then, and really within 25 to 50 years of this being published, it was very clear. Smith was right, Locke was wrong. So the economic policies of nations now are not just built around hoarding money and the value of money and just going after that, but instead around increasing productivity. You can see this in the United States today. We're considered to be the most powerful economy in the world, not because we've balanced our budget, but because of the productivity of the United States economy. The productivity is what makes the country wealthy, not balancing the budget in the end. That's not what does it. Or hoarding away cash. That doesn't do it. Okay? So in what you have here early on in Smith is him setting up erroneous notions about economics and spelling out his theory, which has made him, quite seriously, he did not fall into those errors. It was because of this that he became the father of economics, and Locke did not. Locke wrote some great writings on political philosophy. He, in the end, got his economic theories wrong. They can be tested. Theories can always be tested for reliability. Does it make a prediction, and can that prediction be tested to see if it works out? Now, if you'll jump up to paragraph 11, this is on page 9, I want to spell out what really is going to be the heart of Smith. And the heart of Smith is really in 11, and especially in paragraph 12. In 11, he brings up this notion of free trade. And let me show you with 11, because this is a very eloquent paragraph and explains it quite well. A country that has no mines of its own must undoubtedly draw its gold and silver from foreign countries in the same manner, and a very important phrase here is in the same manner as one that has no vineyards of its own must draw its wines. Notice he makes no inherent difference between wines and gold. There really isn't. It does not seem necessary, however, that the attention of the government should be more tuned towards the one than towards the other object. A country that has the wherewithal to buy wine will always get the wine which it has occasion for. And a country which has the wherewithal to buy gold and silver will never be in want of those metals. They are to be bought for a certain price, like all other commodities, and as they are a price of all other commodities, so all the commodities are the price for those metals. What he's bringing up is free trade and productivity. It's very important to get this idea in mind. Free trade is how you get any commodity. And what he's spelling out is that gold and silver are not inherently special commodities. If you want gold and silver, produce what you know how to produce, which might be wine, which might be beer, which might be crops of wheat, which might be, if we apply it today, computers, movies, or whatever. If you want money, if you want gold and silver, produce what you can produce most effectively and most efficiently, and then trade it for what you need. If you need food and you have money, trade your money for the food. If you need money and you have time, trade your time for money. That's how you do it. That's free trade, and that is what pushes productivity. And that's the backbone of Smith. That is the backbone of it. When he discovered this idea of free trade will generate productivity, and that if you increase productivity, you will have wealth. That's the revolution he created in economics, that notion. 11 sets it out very well, that you focus on what you can produce, and then you will get what you need. Okay? If you jump up to paragraph 12 now, paragraph 12 is probably one of the most famous paragraphs ever written. I will show you another one, but 12 is an excellent one to keep in mind. 12 spells out really the heart of Smith's approach to economics. And again, please keep in mind how different this is than the earlier paragraphs. Those paragraphs he's dismantling. This is what he replaced them with, this different theory. And I do want to spell out, make it very clear that this is a theory of economics. Theories are not opinions. In an empirical field such as economics, theories can be tested. And Smith's theory has been tested and been shown to be very reliable. So going through 12, the quantity of every commodity which human industry can either purchase or produce naturally regulates itself in every country according to the effectual demand, or according to the demand of those who are willing to pay the whole rent, labor, and profits which must be paid in order to prepare and bring it to market. But no commodities regulate themselves more easily or more exactly according to this effectual demand than gold and silver. Because on account of their small bulk and great value of those metals, no commodities can be more easily transported from one place to another, from the places where they are cheap to those where they are dear, from the places where they exceed to those where they fall short of this effectual demand. That is the paragraph where he sets out supply and demand and how those work in free trade. And it's very important. He's bringing in this notion that he spells out in other parts of the book. If you've ever heard of Smith, you've heard of a notion of the invisible hand. The invisible hand is what moves commodities from one region to another, or from another region to another to where they are needed, or where they can be purchased with some other commodity. This will automatically happen if things are left alone. It will automatically happen. He is spelling out the forces that drive markets in 12. That's what does it. It's supply and demand. If you have excessive gold and silver in your country, the value of it will go down. The more you have of a commodity relative to its demand, the value of it drops. If another country wants the gold and silver and they have a need for it, the value of it over there will increase, and they will trade their goods for it and start pulling the gold in that direction. Nobody has to create a policy for that to happen. If one country has the need and has the wherewithal to buy computers, they will pull the computers over to them. If one country has the need and the wherewithal to buy wines, they will pull the wine over to them by trading the goods they have for that wine. They might not use wine to buy computers, they might use cash, but they're going to sell their wine, get the cash, buy the computers. And the people producing the computers will sell the computers for the cash to buy the wine. As long as you leave it alone, free trade, that invisible hand was the metaphor he used. That invisible hand will in the end increase productivity. If you're an excellent country at producing action movies, say the way Los Angeles is, let them do that. If they do that very well, we can trade those movies for cash and then use that cash to buy French wines. That's how we'll get the wines. That's how we'll get what we need. Do what you do best. You'll be the most productive. The invisible hand will take care of it. Jump up, if you will, to paragraph 13. I want to bring up one last notion. When a quantity of gold and silver imported into any country exceeds the effectual demand, no vigilance of government can prevent their exportation. All the sanguinary laws of Spain and Portugal are not able to keep their gold and silver at home. What he's talking about is the restrictions on trade are in the end usually very ineffective. You can think about this today as the restrictions we have on drug sales. It still happens. It just makes it more convoluted. So the restrictions on moving money overseas or out of the country aren't going to work in the end. They're just going to have to go around them. They will find a way to get around it. So restrictions on trade in the end fail one way or another. So what Smith is pointing out is that free trade, when left alone, works most efficiently. If you start putting restrictions on it, it's still going to work, but it's not going to work very well, and you're actually going to impoverish your country by that much. Okay? So we've gotten through the first half of Smith. Once you have those key elements in place, you should be able to understand the rest and follow the rest. Take care.